Every beautiful woman failed to impress the Mafia boss. Then he heard the maid sing the opening hook. Adrian Romano slammed his glass against the marble wall, and it shattered into 100 pieces as the woman in the red dress flinched. "Get out," he said, his voice colder than the winter outside. "All of you. I never want to see another painted face begging for my attention again." 3 of the most beautiful women in Chicago gathered their coats and fled his mansion in silence. That was the man Emily Carter would meet the next morning. A man who despised everyone, a man nobody could touch. Before we begin, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and follow Emily's story all the way to the end. And please, tell me in the comments what city you are watching from today, so I can see how far this story has traveled around the world. Now, let us begin. The morning Emily Carter first walked through the iron gates of the Romano mansion, she had already been awake for 19 hours. She had spent the night on a hard plastic chair in the hallway of Mercy General Hospital, holding her little brother's hand while the machines beeped and the doctors whispered words she could barely afford to understand. Daniel was only 16. His kidneys were failing again, and the new round of treatment cost more money than Emily had ever held in her hands at one time. So when the cleaning agency called her at 5 in the morning and offered her a position at a private estate paying triple the usual rate, she did not ask questions. She did not care whose house it was. She only cared that the number they said out loud might keep her brother alive one more month. She had no idea whose house she was about to enter. The housekeeper who met her at the servants' door was a stern older woman named Mrs. Petrov, with gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull the kindness right out of her face. She looked Emily up and down, taking in the worn coat, the cheap shoes, the tired eyes. "You're the new girl," Mrs. Petrov said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am, Emily Carter." "You'll follow 3 rules in this house, Miss Carter, and you'll follow them exactly. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not touch anything in Mr. Romano's private study, and never, under any circumstances, look him directly in the eyes." Mrs. Petrov paused. "The last girl who forgot that rule doesn't work here anymore." Emily swallowed hard. "I understand." "No," Mrs. Petrov said quietly. "You don't, but you will." Emily did not understand what that meant. Not yet. She only nodded and took the apron that was handed to her, tying it around her waist with fingers that trembled from exhaustion. She told herself she could survive anything for 1 month. She had survived worse. She had survived their parents dying in the same year. She had survived dropping out of college. She had survived 100 nights of choosing between food and medicine. She could survive one wealthy man's rules. What Emily did not know, as she picked up her bucket and cloth and began to climb the grand staircase, was that Adrian Romano was not simply wealthy. He was the most feared man in the city. The stories about him traveled through Chicago like smoke through a burning building. Some said he controlled half the docks and every shipment that moved through them. Some said politicians took his calls at 3 in the morning and thanked him for the privilege. Some said men who crossed him simply vanished, and their families learned very quickly to stop asking where they had gone. Nobody knew what was true and what was legend, and that was exactly how Adrian wanted it. Fear worked best when it had no edges. Fear worked best when no one could measure it. He was 38 years old, and he had not felt anything close to joy in more years than he could count. That morning, Adrian sat alone in his study, with a cup of black coffee growing cold beside him, staring at a photograph he kept locked in the top drawer of his desk. It was old and creased, the colors faded to soft browns and yellows. In the photograph, a woman held a small boy on her lap and laughed at something outside the frame. The boy was Adrian, though no one alive would have recognized him now. The woman was his mother. She had been dead for 30 years. He put the photograph away before anyone could see it. He always did. Nobody in this house, nobody in this city, was allowed to know that behind the ice and the threats and the shattered glasses, there was still a boy who missed his mother. By 9 o'clock that morning, Adrian had already thrown 3 people out of his home. The first was a business associate who had lied to him about a shipment. The second was a lawyer who had wasted 20 minutes of his time explaining something that could have been said in 2. And the third, the one who made him truly angry, was a woman named Vanessa who had arrived uninvited with a bottle of champagne and a smile she clearly believed no man could resist. "Adrian," she had purred, draping herself across the doorway of his study, "you've been ignoring me for weeks. I thought I'd come remind you of what you're missing." He had not even looked up from his papers. "Leave. You don't mean that." She stepped closer. "Every man in this city would give anything to have me standing where I'm standing right now." "Then go find one of them," Adrian said. And finally he lifted his eyes to her, and what she saw in them made her smile falter. "Because I would give a great deal to have you gone." She had left in tears, and Adrian had felt nothing. That was the part that would have frightened anyone who truly knew him. He did not feel cruel. He did not feel satisfied. He simply felt nothing at all, the way a man who has been cold for too long stops noticing the cold. Beautiful women had thrown themselves at him for 20 years, and every single one of them wanted the same thing: his money, his protection, his name. Not one of them had ever looked at him and seen a person. They saw a fortress they wanted to live inside. So he had stopped opening the gates. He had stopped letting anyone in. And that was the man Emily Carter was cleaning for, as she moved quietly through the upstairs hallways, dusting furniture that cost more than she would earn in 10 years, wiping fingerprints off mirrors in rooms that no one ever seemed to use. She worked in silence for hours. She did not sing at first. She was too afraid. But something happened around noon that she could not have predicted. As she cleaned an empty bedroom near the west wing, a room with tall windows and a piano, no one played, she found herself thinking about Daniel. She thought about how he used to beg her to sing to him when he was small and scared of the dark. She thought about how their grandmother had sung to both of them, in a language they barely understood, old songs from a country none of them had ever seen. And without meaning to, without even realizing she was doing it, Emily began to sing. It was an old Italian melody. She did not know the words perfectly. She only knew the way her grandmother's voice had risen and fallen, the way the notes seemed to carry something ancient and sad and unbearably beautiful. She sang it under her breath as she dusted the piano, her voice barely above a whisper, and she thought no one could hear her. She was wrong. 2 floors below, in his study, Adrian Romano lifted his head. At first he thought he had imagined it, a trick of the wind perhaps, or a radio left on somewhere. But then the melody drifted down the stairs again, faint and unmistakable, and Adrian felt something happen inside his chest that had not happened in 30 years. His heart stopped. He knew that song. He knew it the way you know your own name. He knew it because it was the last thing his mother had ever sung to him, on the last night he ever saw her alive, before the men came, and everything he loved was taken away in a single night of blood and fire. He had spent 3 decades trying to forget that melody. He had paid enormous sums of money over the years, hiring people to search for its origin, to trace where it came from and what it meant, because he had come to believe it held the answer to a question that had haunted him his entire life. And now, impossibly, it was floating through his own house. Adrian stood up so quickly that his chair fell over behind him. He moved through the mansion like a storm, taking the stairs 2 at a time, following the sound. Mrs. Petrov saw him pass and started to speak, but the look on his face silenced her instantly. She had worked for Adrian Romano for 11 years, and she had never once seen him move with such urgency. She had never seen his face look like that, open, raw, almost afraid. He reached the west wing and stopped in the doorway of the room with the piano, and there she was, a young woman in a cheap gray uniform, a dustcloth in one hand, her dark hair falling loose around a tired face, singing his mother's song to an empty room. Emily did not hear him at first. She was lost in the music, in the memory of her grandmother, in the ache of missing her family. It was only when the final note faded and she turned to reach for the next surface that she saw him standing there, and she froze. The cloth fell from her hand. She knew immediately that she had broken a rule. She did not know which one, but she knew from the way this man was looking at her that something was terribly wrong. She had never seen him before, but she understood instantly, from the cut of his suit and the coldness in his eyes and the way the very air in the room seemed to bend around him, exactly who he must be. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, backing away. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't know anyone could hear me. I'll be quiet, I promise. Please don't tell Mrs. Petrov. I need this job. I really need this job." Adrian did not seem to hear a word she said. "Where did you learn that song?" he asked. His voice was strange. It was not the cold voice he used for business associates and beautiful women. It was low and rough, like the words were being pulled out of him against his will. Emily blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The song." He took a step into the room, and Emily instinctively took a step back. "The one you were just singing. Where did you learn it? Tell me, now." "My grandmother," Emily said, her voice shaking. "She taught it to me when I was little. It's just an old song, sir. I don't even know all the words. I didn't mean anything by it, I swear. I was just cleaning and I wasn't thinking, and I'll never do it again." Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Something was moving behind his eyes, some vast machinery of memory and calculation and disbelief. Emily could not read it. She only knew that this powerful, terrifying man was looking at her like she was a ghost. "What was your grandmother's name?" he said. "I don't understand. Why does it matter?" "What was her name?" Emily hesitated. There was something in his voice that made refusing feel dangerous. "Rosa. Her name was Rosa Carter. But that wasn't her real name, I think. She always said Carter was a name she took later, after she came to this country. She never told us her old one. She said it was safer if we didn't know." The color drained from Adrian's face. He reached out and gripped the edge of the piano, as if he suddenly needed it to keep himself standing. Emily watched in confusion as this man who commanded an entire city seemed for one moment to become as fragile as a child. "Safer," he repeated quietly. "She said it was safer if you didn't know." "Yes." Emily did not understand what was happening. "Sir, are you all right? Should I call someone?" Adrian did not answer. He was somewhere else entirely, somewhere 30 years in the past, standing in the ruins of a life that had been stolen from him. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "There was a family," he said, "a long time ago, in Sicily, and then here. They were called the Marinos. They were good people, or as good as anyone could be in that world. And one night, all of them disappeared, the whole family, wiped out, everyone said. A tragedy, a mystery. But my mother always told me that one of them survived, a young woman. She escaped the night it happened and vanished, and no one ever found her. My mother used to sing that song because it was the Marino family's song. She said as long as someone was still singing it, the family wasn't truly gone." Emily's mouth had gone dry. "I don't understand what you're telling me." Adrian looked at her, and for the first time, Emily saw not a terrifying man, but a haunted one. "I'm telling you," he said, "that the song you just sang has not been heard in this world for 30 years. I'm telling you that I have spent a fortune trying to find where it came from. And I'm telling you that the only people who ever knew it were the Marinos." He paused. "Which means your grandmother was not who you thought she was, Miss Carter, and neither, I suspect, are you." Emily wanted to laugh. It was absurd. She was a maid. She cleaned houses. She ate cheap noodles standing over her kitchen sink and counted quarters to afford the bus. She was nobody. She had always been nobody. The idea that she could be connected to some vanished family, to this man's tragic past, to any of it, was ridiculous. "With respect, sir," she said, "I think you're mistaken. My grandmother was a seamstress. My family has never had anything. I'm sure lots of people know old Italian songs. Not this one." Adrian's voice hardened, but there was no cruelty in it now, only certainty. "Sing it again." "Sir, I really should get back to work." "Sing it again." Something in the way he said it made refusing impossible. So Emily, standing in that grand empty room with her heart pounding and her hands trembling, sang the melody one more time, and this time she watched Adrian Romano's face as she did, and she saw something she would never forget as long as she lived. She saw a tear slide silently down the cheek of the most feared man in Chicago. When she finished, he did not speak for a long time. Then very quietly he said, "My mother sang me that song the night she died. I was 8 years old. I hid under a bed and I heard everything, and afterward, when it was quiet again, I crawled out and she was gone. All of them were gone. And the only thing I had left was that song, and I've been carrying it alone for 30 years. He looked at her. "And now here you are, a stranger in my house, singing it back to me." Emily did not know what to say. She was a young woman who had walked into this house hoping only to survive 1 month, and now she was standing in the middle of something enormous and old and dangerous, something she did not understand and had never asked for. "I think," she said carefully, "that I should go now." "No," Adrian said. The word came out sharper than he intended, and Emily flinched. He saw her fear, and something in him, some instinct he had buried for decades, made him want to soften it. He was not accustomed to that feeling. He was not accustomed to caring whether anyone was afraid of him. Fear was useful. Fear kept him safe, but he did not want this young woman to be afraid. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. And the strangeness of hearing himself say those words out loud almost made him laugh. When had he ever reassured anyone of anything? "I need to understand what this means. I need to understand who your grandmother was. And I think, Miss Carter, that you need to understand it too. Because if I'm right, then your family didn't just disappear. Your family was destroyed, on purpose, by people who are still alive. And if any of them ever learn that a Marino is still breathing, still walking around this city cleaning houses and singing that song, then your life is going to become very complicated, very fast." Emily stared at him. The exhaustion, the fear, the sheer impossibility of the day was catching up to her all at once. "Why are you telling me this? You don't even know me. 10 minutes ago you didn't know I existed." "Because," Adrian said slowly, "for 30 years I have wanted two things more than I have wanted anything else in this world. I wanted to know what happened to my mother's people, and I wanted to find whoever was responsible." He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes now that was not sadness and was not fear. It was purpose. You may be the key to both, whether you want to be or not. Down the hall, unseen by either of them, Mrs. Petrov stood very still, listening to every word. Her face had gone pale. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, and her lips were moving in something that might have been a prayer. Because Mrs. Petrov had worked in this house for 11 years, and she knew more secrets than she would ever admit, and she understood something that neither Adrian nor Emily had yet realized. She understood that from the moment Emily Carter opened her mouth to sing, the fragile peace that had held Chicago's most dangerous families in balance for 30 years had just begun to crack. Emily, meanwhile, was thinking about Daniel. "Sir," she said, and her voice was steadier now, because when she thought about her brother, she always found her courage. "I don't know anything about your mother or the Marinos or any of this. I really don't. But I do know one thing. I have a 16-year-old brother in a hospital bed across town, and everything I do, every hour I work, every floor I scrub, is to keep him alive. I came here to earn money, that's all. So if you're telling me the truth, if being here is dangerous, then I can't afford danger. I can't. I have to think about him." Adrian was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that surprised them both. "How much does his treatment cost?" Emily blinked. "What?" "Your brother, his treatment, how much?" "I don't see how that's any of your business. Everything in this house is my business, Miss Carter." But he said it gently. "How much?" Emily told him. The number was so large that she felt ashamed even saying it out loud, a number she stayed awake at night doing arithmetic against, a number that felt like a wall she could never climb over no matter how hard she worked. Adrian did not even blink. "Then here is what I propose," he said. "You will stop cleaning houses. You will stay here in this mansion as my guest. Your brother will receive the finest medical care in this country, paid for entirely by me, starting tomorrow morning. In exchange, you will help me understand who you are and where you came from. That's all. That's the only thing I ask." Emily could not believe what she was hearing. Part of her wanted to weep with relief. The money he was offering could save Daniel's life. It could end years of fear and sleepless nights and impossible choices in a single moment. But another part of her, the part that had survived everything by never trusting anyone too quickly, held back. "Nothing is free," she said, "especially not from a man like you. What's the catch? What do you really want?" Adrian almost smiled. It was the first time in longer than he could remember that anyone had spoken to him with such honesty. The beautiful women who chased him lied constantly, flattered constantly, told him whatever they thought he wanted to hear. This tired young woman in a cleaning uniform had just looked the most dangerous man in Chicago in the eye and demanded to know what he was hiding. He found that he respected her for it. "You're right to be suspicious," he said. "In my world, generosity always has a price. But I'm not lying to you, Miss Carter. What I want is the truth. My mother died believing that one member of her family survived. If you're that survivor's granddaughter, then you and I are connected by blood that was spilled the same night, and I have spent my entire life waiting to find the people who spilled it." His jaw tightened. "That's what I want. Not you, not romance, not any of the things those other women think I want. I want justice, and you may be the only person alive who can help me find it." Emily was silent for a long time. She thought about Daniel, small and pale in his hospital bed. She thought about her grandmother, who had never told them her real name, who had cried sometimes late at night when she thought the children were asleep, who had made Emily promise to always sing the old song even after she was gone. She had never understood why it mattered so much. Now, for the first time, she wondered if her grandmother had been trying to protect them from something, or perhaps trying to leave them a message they were never supposed to forget. "If I say yes," Emily said slowly, "and if any of this is true, and if people really would want to hurt me for being who you think I am, then what happens to my brother? He's helpless. He's in a hospital. Anyone could get to him." "He'll be protected," Adrian said immediately. "I'll have men on him within the hour. No one will touch him. You have my word." And why should I trust the word of a criminal? The question hung in the air between them. It was a dangerous thing to say to a man like Adrian Romano. Anyone who knew him would have gasped to hear a maid speak to him that way. But Adrian did not grow angry. Instead, something in his expression shifted, and for just a moment, the ice cracked, and Emily saw the boy who had hidden under a bed 30 years ago and lost everything he loved. "Because," he said quietly, "you are the first person in 30 years to sing my mother's song, and I would burn this entire city to the ground before I let anything happen to you." Emily did not know it yet, but he meant every word. She looked at this strange, broken, terrifying man, and she made a decision that would change the rest of her life. "I'll stay," she said, "for Daniel, not for you, and not for any dead family I've never heard of. For my brother. That's the only reason. Do you understand?" "I understand. And if you ever lie to me, if you ever put my brother in danger, if any of this turns out to be some trick, I will walk out that door and you will never see me again." Adrian nodded slowly. "That's fair. Then we have an agreement." She held out her hand. It was a small hand, roughened by years of scrubbing floors and washing dishes, chapped from cheap soap and cold water. Adrian looked at it, and then this man who never touched anyone, who kept the whole world at arm's length, who had thrown 3 people out of his home that very morning, reached out and shook the hand of a maid, and something passed between them that neither of them could name. Outside the window, Chicago went about its business, unaware that anything had changed. But everything had changed, because far across the city, in a very different mansion, an old man with silver hair and cold eyes was about to receive a phone call. A call from someone who had been watching the Romano estate for reasons of his own. A call that would begin with 3 simple words that would set fire to a peace that had held for 3 decades. "She's still alive." And in the room with the piano, Emily Carter, who had woken up that morning as an invisible girl scrubbing floors to save her brother's life, let go of Adrian Romano's hand and had no idea that she had just become the most hunted woman in the city. She only knew that for the first time in years, someone had heard her voice, and that the powerful man standing in front of her, the man everyone feared, the man no beautiful woman had ever been able to reach, was looking at her as though she was the answer to a question he had been asking his entire life. "Come with me," Adrian said. "There's a great deal you need to understand, and we don't have much time." Emily hesitated at the doorway. Everything in her ordinary, careful, frightened life told her to run, to grab her coat and her dignity and go back to the small apartment and the hard work and the world she understood. But something else, something older and deeper, something that felt almost like the pull of her grandmother's voice from long ago, told her to follow. She thought of the song. She thought of Rosa. She thought of the name her grandmother had never spoken, the name that had died with her, the name that this strange man seemed to already know. And she followed him down the grand staircase into a story that had been waiting 30 years for her to arrive. Behind them, unseen, Mrs. Petrov quietly closed the door to the room with the piano. She stood alone in the hallway for a long moment, her heart heavy with things she could not yet say. Then she walked slowly to a small telephone in the servants' quarters, picked it up with trembling fingers, and dialed a number she had promised herself she would never dial. "It's me," she whispered when someone answered. "You told me to call if she ever appeared, if a girl who knew the song ever walked into this house." She closed her eyes. "She's here. Rosa's granddaughter is here, and Romano knows." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then a voice, old and dangerous, replied, "Then it has begun." Emily Carter descended the last step of the staircase, unaware of any of it, unaware of the phone calls being made across the city, unaware of the men who were already being sent, unaware that the quiet life she had clung to so desperately was already gone forever. She only knew that her brother might live now. That was enough. That was everything. She did not yet know the price, but she would learn it soon. The room Adrian led her into was smaller than the others, lined floor to ceiling with books that looked as though no one had touched them in years. He shut the door behind them and turned the lock, and Emily's heart jumped at the sound. "You said you wouldn't hurt me," she said quickly. "I locked the door because these walls have ears," Adrian answered. "Mrs. Petrov, the staff, the men who guard the gates, I trust none of them completely. What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. Do you understand?" Emily nodded slowly, though her hand stayed near the door handle. Old habits. She had learned young that when a room felt dangerous, you always kept your exit in reach. Adrian noticed. He noticed everything. "You don't trust me." "No," she said, "I don't." "Good." He almost smiled. "The ones who trust too quickly are the ones who get buried. Sit." She did not sit. She stood by the door with her arms crossed, watching him cross to a wall panel that looked like every other panel until he pressed it and it clicked open, revealing a hidden safe. Emily felt her stomach tighten. Nothing about this was the world she came from. Nothing about this was safe. Adrian opened the safe and took out a leather folder, thick and worn at the corners. He set it on the desk between them. 30 years I have collected this," he said. "Every scrap of paper, every photograph, every name I could find about the night the Marino family died. I have paid detectives, bribed policemen, threatened old men into telling me things they swore they'd take to their graves. And in all that time, I found only one thing that everyone agreed on." He looked up at her. One woman escaped, a young woman, Rosa. Emily's arms uncrossed slowly. "That's not possible," she whispered. "My grandmother was nobody. She sewed dresses. She lived in a 2-room apartment. She saved coupons." "She hid," Adrian corrected. "For 50 years she hid so well that even the men hunting her believed she was dead. That is not the life of a nobody, Miss Carter. That is the life of a survivor." He opened the folder and slid a photograph across the desk. "Is this her?" Emily did not want to look, but she looked. It was a young woman, perhaps 20, standing in front of a stone building with dark eyes and a serious mouth. And though the photograph was decades old, though the face was young where Emily had only known it old, she recognized her grandmother instantly. The same eyes, the same stubborn set of the jaw that Emily saw in the mirror every morning. Her hand flew to her mouth. "That's her," she breathed. "That's Grandma Rosa. Where did you get this?" "From a file that took me 11 years and a great deal of money to find." Adrian watched her face. "Now do you believe me?" Emily sank into the chair she had refused a moment ago. Her legs simply stopped holding her. She stared at the photograph of a woman she had loved her whole life and had never truly known at all. "Why didn't she tell us?" Emily said, and her voice cracked. "Why would she keep this from me, from Daniel? We were her family. We were all she had." "Because she loved you," Adrian said quietly. "Because the moment you knew the truth, you became a target. She kept you invisible to keep you alive. And it worked, Miss Carter. For 50 years it worked perfectly." He paused. "Right up until you sang that song in my house this morning." The weight of it landed on Emily all at once. Her grandmother's silence had not been secrecy. It had been a shield. And Emily had let it fall the moment she opened her mouth to sing. "Then I've undone everything she did," Emily said. In one morning. 50 years of hiding, and I ruined it because I was cleaning a piano and thinking about my brother. You didn't know. That doesn't matter. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. It doesn't matter that I didn't know. The result is the same. Whoever these people are, they can find me now. Adrian was silent for a moment. Then he said, yes, they can, which is why you are safer inside these walls than anywhere else in this city. Emily looked up at him. Or I'm in the exact center of the danger, depending on who you really are. That landed. She saw it land. For just a second, something flickered across his face that she couldn't read, and then it was gone. It was 11:40 in the morning when Mrs. Petrov knocked on the locked door. Adrian's whole body went still. He put a finger to his lips and moved silently to the door, and Emily watched the transformation happen in front of her. The haunted man vanished. In his place stood the cold, controlled figure she had glimpsed when she first saw him. He unlocked the door and opened it just wide enough to fill the gap with his own body. What is it? Forgive me, sir. Mrs. Petrov's voice was steady, but Emily, watching from inside, saw the woman's hands twisting the fabric of her apron. There's a car at the front gate, a man asking to see you. He says his name is Salvatore. Something changed in Adrian's shoulders, a tension, coiled and dangerous. Salvatore doesn't make house calls, Adrian said slowly. He says it's urgent, sir. He says it concerns something that arrived at your home this morning. Mrs. Petrov's eyes flicked, just for an instant, past Adrian's shoulder toward Emily. It was so quick that Emily almost missed it. But she didn't miss it, and a cold finger traced its way down her spine. Adrian did not turn around, but his voice dropped so low that Emily barely heard it. Tell him I'll be down in 5 minutes. Offer him coffee. Keep him in the front room. Mrs. Petrov nodded and hurried away. Adrian closed the door and locked it again, and when he turned back to Emily, his face had changed. Who is Salvatore? Emily asked. Her voice came out thinner than she wanted. A man I have known for 20 years. A man I have never once trusted. Adrian crossed the room quickly and pulled back the corner of a curtain, looking down at the driveway. And a man who has never come to my house uninvited in all that time, until today, the same day you arrived. You think that's a coincidence? I don't believe in coincidence. He let the curtain fall. Someone talked. Someone in this house saw you, heard you, understood what it meant, and made a phone call before I even finished shaking your hand. Emily thought of Mrs. Petrov's eyes flicking toward her. She thought of the way the housekeeper's hands had twisted her apron. The housekeeper, Emily said. She looked at me, just now. When she said it concerned something that arrived this morning, she looked right at me. Adrian's jaw tightened. I know. I saw it too. Then she's the one who... Maybe, maybe not. He held up a hand. In my world, you never accuse until you're certain. If I move against the wrong person, I lose the chance to find the right one. For now, we assume everyone is watching. Everyone. He looked at her hard, including me. Even you should assume I might be your enemy. It's the only way you stay sharp. It was a strange thing to say, and it unsettled her more than any threat could have. She had walked into this house a maid, and in the space of a single morning, she had become something she didn't have a name for, standing in a locked room with a man who was warning her not to trust him, even as he asked her to. I need to see Daniel, she said suddenly. If any of this is real, I need to know he's safe, right now, before you go downstairs to whoever that man is. Adrian studied her for a moment. Then he pulled a phone from his jacket and dialed. He spoke in short, clipped sentences to whoever answered, giving the name of the hospital, Daniel's name, his room number, instructions Emily didn't fully understand, but understood the shape of. Get men there. Protect him. No one in, no one out without approval. When he hung up, he looked at her. Done. 2 of my most trusted men are on their way to Mercy General. Your brother will not be alone for a single minute from this point forward. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Trusted, she repeated. You just told me you trust no one. Adrian actually paused at that. You listen carefully, he said. That's good. It'll keep you alive. He moved toward the door. Stay here. Lock it behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me, and even then, ask me a question only I would know the answer to. Ask me what song you sang this morning. If the man on the other side of the door can't answer, don't open it, no matter what he says. Do you understand?" Emily's mouth had gone dry. "You're scaring me." "Good," Adrian said again, but gently this time. "Fear is what your grandmother used to survive 50 years. Learn to use it too." And then he was gone, and Emily locked the door behind him, and she stood alone in a room full of books she'd never read, in a house full of secrets she'd never asked for, holding a photograph of a grandmother she'd never really known. It was 11:52. Downstairs, Adrian descended the grand staircase like a king walking to war. By the time he reached the front room, every trace of the man who had wept at a Maid song was buried under 30 years of practiced ice. He entered the room, and the man waiting there stood up. Salvatore was old, perhaps 70, with silver hair combed straight back and a face like carved stone. He wore an expensive coat and a patient smile, and his eyes were the coldest thing in a house full of cold things. "Adrian," Salvatore said warmly, spreading his hands, "it's been too long." "Not long enough," Adrian said. "You don't come to my home, Salvatore. That was always our arrangement. We meet on neutral ground. So either you've forgotten 20 years of rules, or something has made you desperate enough to break them. Which is it?" Salvatore's smile didn't waver. "Straight to business. I always admired that about you." He lowered himself back into the chair without being invited. "Very well. I'll be direct, as a courtesy. There's a rumor moving through certain circles. A ghost story, really. They're saying a Marino has surfaced. After all these years. Here, in Chicago." He looked up at Adrian. "In your house." Adrian did not move, did not blink, did not give the old man a single thing to read. "That's a strange rumor," Adrian said. "Isn't it? I thought so too. I told the men who brought it to me, I said, Adrian would never keep something like that from his old friends. The Marino matter concerns all of us. It was settled 30 years ago, and it stays settled for everyone's protection." Salvatore's voice never rose, but something underneath it turned to steel. "So I've come to hear you say it. Say there's no Marino in your house, and I'll drink your coffee and leave, and we'll never speak of it again." The room was very quiet, and Adrian understood in that moment several things at once. He understood that Salvatore already knew the answer, or he would never have come. He understood that a denial would be tested, and if the lie was caught, it would be war. And he understood, with a cold and sudden certainty that made his blood run hot, that Salvatore's presence in this room 30 years after that terrible night could only mean one thing. Salvatore had been there. Salvatore was one of them. It was 12 exactly when Adrian smiled, and it was the most dangerous smile in Chicago. "There's no Marino in my house," Adrian said smoothly. "I hired a new cleaning girl this morning. Some agency sent her. She sang while she worked, badly, some old folk song, and one of the staff got sentimental and started a story out of nothing. That's your ghost, Salvatore. A maid with a mop and a pretty voice, nothing more." He watched the old man's face like a hawk, and he saw it, the flicker of doubt, the recalculation. Salvatore had come certain, and now he was uncertain, and uncertainty was the only weapon Adrian had. "A maid," Salvatore repeated. "A maid. You're welcome to check the agency's records. You're welcome to search my house top to bottom, though I'll take it as an insult, and you know what my insults cost." Adrian let that hang. "Or you can trust 20 years of our arrangement and go home." Salvatore was quiet for a long moment. Then he rose, slowly, an old man's caution in every movement. "You were always a very good liar, Adrian," he said pleasantly. "It's why we let you rise as high as you did. But I've been telling lies since before you were born." He buttoned his coat. "I'll go home. I'll tell the others it was nothing. A maid with a pretty voice." He walked to the door, then stopped and turned back. "But understand me. If it ever turns out to be more than nothing, if that pretty voice ever turns out to carry Marino blood, then the arrangement between us ends. And you and I both know what happens then. To you. And to her." He left. Adrian stood alone in the front room, and for the first time in years, his hands were not entirely steady, because he had learned more from that visit than Salvatore ever intended to give. He had learned that his oldest enemy was one of the men who had murdered his mother. He had learned that they were already hunting Emily, and he had learned that the peace he had lived inside for 30 years had never been peace at all. It had been a truce built on a mass grave. Upstairs, Emily heard the front door close, and then heard the car engine start and fade down the driveway. She waited, heart pounding, and a few minutes later there was a soft knock at the study door. "Emily, it's me." She didn't open it. "What song did I sing this morning?" There was a pause on the other side, and then Adrian's voice, quieter than she'd ever heard it. "My mother's song. The Merino song. The one that made a grown man cry in front of a stranger for the first time in 30 years. She opened the door. He looked older than he had an hour ago. Whatever had happened downstairs had cost him something. "What happened?" she asked. "Who was he?" Adrian came in and locked the door and sat down heavily, and for a moment he didn't answer. Then he looked at her. "His name is Salvatore, and I have just realized, 30 years too late, that he is one of the men who killed my family, and yours." Emily's hand went to her chest. "You're sure?" "As sure as I've ever been of anything." Adrian's voice was low and terrible. "He came here today to find out if you were real, and I lied to his face and told him you were nothing. A maid with a pretty voice. He half believed me. Half." He looked up. "Which buys us a little time. Not much. Days, maybe. And in those days, we have to decide what we're going to do." "What are our choices?" Emily asked. "Two." He held up a finger. "One. You run. Tonight. I give you money, papers, a new name, and you take your brother the moment he can travel, and you disappear the way your grandmother did, and you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder and never singing that song again." He held up a second finger. "Two. You stay, and we fight. We prove what these men did 30 years ago. We drag it into the light, and we end them before they end you. But that path is soaked in blood, Emily. Some of it might be yours. All of it will be theirs." Emily was quiet for a long time. She thought of her grandmother, running, hiding, changing her name, crying in the dark. She thought of 50 years lived in a cage of fear, and something in her, something stubborn and tired and angry, rose up. "My grandmother ran," she said slowly. "She ran her whole life, and she died in a 2-room apartment with coupons in a drawer and a name that wasn't even hers." Emily looked up, and her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "I don't want to run. I've been invisible my whole life. I've cleaned other people's houses and eaten other people's leftovers and let the world walk past me like I wasn't there. If these men killed my family, then I want them to know my name before they try to touch me. My real name. The one my grandmother was too afraid to say out loud." She swallowed. "What was it, Adrian? What was our real name?" Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and then he said it, softly, like it was something sacred. "Merino," he said. "Your grandmother was Rosa Merino, which makes you the last of them. Emily Merino." Emily heard the name, and something happened inside her that she couldn't have explained. It didn't feel like a stranger's name. It felt like something she had always known and forgotten. It felt like coming home to a house she'd never seen. "Emily Merino," she repeated. "The last of a family that a group of very powerful men believed they had erased from the earth 30 years ago." Adrian leaned forward. "And if you choose to stay, if you choose to fight, then you won't be doing it alone. Because they took my family that same night, Emily. Your blood and mine were spilled together. That makes this my war as much as yours. Whatever they built on top of those graves, I will help you tear it down, even if it kills me." It was 12:20 in the afternoon when Emily Merino made the decision that changed everything. "I'll stay," she said. "I'll fight." Adrian nodded slowly, and something like respect moved across his face. "Then the first thing we do," he said, "is find out who talked, because someone in this house told Salvatore you were here within an hour of you arriving, and until we know who, we can't trust anyone under this roof." As if the words themselves had summoned it, there was a sound in the hallway outside. A footstep. Then the soft click of a floorboard settling, the kind of sound a person makes when they've been standing very still and then shifts their weight. Adrian's hand moved to his jacket. He crossed the room in 3 silent strides and threw the door open. Mrs. Petrov stood in the hallway frozen, her face white as paper. For a long moment nobody spoke. The housekeeper's eyes darted from Adrian to Emily and back, and Emily saw guilt written across every line of the woman's face, guilt and fear in equal measure. "How long have you been standing there?" Adrian asked, and his voice was terrifyingly quiet. "Sir, I was only bringing fresh towels." "How long?" Mrs. Petrov's composure cracked. She looked at Emily, and to Emily's astonishment, the old woman's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "God forgive me, I'm so sorry." "You called Salvatore," Adrian said. It wasn't a question. "No." Mrs. Petrov shook her head violently. "No, sir, I swear to you I never called Salvatore. I would never—" She stopped, and her whole body seemed to sag. "But I did make a call. This morning, when I heard her sing, I called someone I promised long ago that I would call if a girl who knew the song ever came." Emily's blood turned to ice. "Who?" she said. "Who did you call?" Mrs. Petrov looked at her, and something broke open in the old woman's face. Some grief she had carried for a very long time. "Child," she said, "I've been waiting for you to walk through that door for 30 years. Do you know why?" She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "Because I was there the night your family died. I was a young woman then, a servant in the Marino house, and when the men came, when they killed everyone, your grandmother saved my life. She hid me in the same place she hid herself. We escaped together, and before we went our separate ways, she made me promise one thing. She said, 'If you ever hear my song again, in this life, coming from a stranger's mouth, then it means my blood survived. And if that day comes, you find her, and you protect her, and you tell her the truth about what happened.'" Emily could not breathe. "You knew my grandmother," she whispered. "I loved your grandmother," Mrs. Petrov said, and the tears spilled over now, running freely down her weathered face. "She was the bravest woman I ever knew, and when I took a position in this house 11 years ago, I didn't know it belonged to a Romano. But when I found out, I stayed. Do you know why I stayed, working for a man everyone said was a monster?" She looked at Adrian, and her voice steadied. "Because I recognized him. I recognized his eyes. He has his mother's eyes. And his mother, God rest her, was the only friend Rosa Marino ever had. The two families were bound together long before that terrible night, and I thought, if fate ever brought the last Marino back into the world, this house, of all the houses in Chicago, is where she would be safe." The room was utterly silent. Adrian's face had gone pale. "My mother," he said hoarsely. "You knew my mother." "I served in a house that shared a garden wall with hers when we were all young before everything," Mrs. Petrov said. "She used to sing that song over the wall to Rosa, and Rosa would sing it back. That's how the two families spoke to each other when words weren't safe, through the song." She looked between them, the broken Mafia boss and the frightened maid, both of them staring at her like she'd risen from the dead. "You two were bound together before either of you was born, and you found each other again through the only thing your mothers left behind." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I always believed you would. I just prayed I'd live long enough to see it." Emily's legs gave out and she sat down hard. It was too much, all of it. In the space of a single morning, she had gone from an invisible girl scrubbing a piano to the last daughter of a murdered family, standing in a room with a man whose mother had loved her grandmother, listening to a housekeeper who had watched her family die. "The call," Adrian said, and his voice had lost its edge, but not its urgency. "You said you made a call this morning. If not to Salvatore, then to whom?" Mrs. Petrov wiped her eyes. "To the man Rosa told me to call, the last living member of the network that helped us escape that night. An old man now. He hid us, moved us, gave us new names, kept us alive. Rosa trusted him with her life and mine. She said if the day ever came, he was the only one who could be trusted to protect her blood." She hesitated. "His name is Vincent, and he told me to bring you to him tonight. He said there are things about that night that even I never knew, things Rosa never told me, things only he can tell you." Adrian and Emily exchanged a look. "It could be a trap," Adrian said. "You've been in my house 11 years and I never knew any of this. How do I know you're not lying? How do I know this Vincent isn't Salvatore's man, and this whole story isn't a way to lure Emily out of the one place she's safe? Mrs. Petrov drew herself up, and for a moment Emily saw the young servant she must once have been, the woman brave enough to survive a massacre. "You don't," she said simply. "You don't know. In your world, no one can ever be certain of anyone. But I'll tell you what I told Rosa all those years ago when she asked me why she should trust me." The old woman turned to Emily. "Ask me what song your grandmother sang. Not the melody, the words, the real words, the ones almost no one alive still knows. Ask me, child." Emily's heart was pounding. "I don't know the words. I only know the melody. She never taught me the words." "I know," Mrs. Petrov said softly. "She never taught them to you because the words were the most dangerous part. The words are a name. The song isn't a folk song at all. It's a lullaby your great-great-grandmother wrote, and hidden inside it, in the old dialect, is the name of every child born to the family, going back 100 years. It's a record, a living record, passed from mouth to mouth, so that even if every paper was burned, even if every house was destroyed, the family could never truly be erased as long as one person still sang it." She looked at Emily with something like awe. "Your grandmother didn't teach you the words to keep you safe, but she taught you the melody so that someday, if it was ever safe again, someone who knew the words could teach them back to you, and you could carry them forward." Her voice broke. "You are the record, child. You are the last page of a book 100 years old. That's why they want you dead. Not because of who you are, because of what you remember. Because you are proof they never won." Emily sat frozen, the enormity of it crashing over her in waves. Adrian stood very still, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Then Vincent," he said, "the man who knows the words." "He's the last one alive who does," Mrs. Petrov said, "and he's old, and he's dying, and when he goes, those words go with him forever, unless she learns them first." She looked at Emily. "That's why he wants to see you tonight. Not to trap you, to give you the only thing your grandmother couldn't, your whole name, your whole family, everyone who came before you." She wiped her face. "Before it's too late." It was 12:40 in the afternoon, and Emily Marino understood finally what her grandmother had spent 50 years protecting. Not money, not power, a song. 100 years of names hidden in a lullaby, sung over a garden wall between two mothers who were both long dead now, carried by a frightened girl who had never known why the music made her want to weep. "I'll go," Emily said. "Tonight. I have to learn them, before there's no one left to teach me." Adrian looked at her, and then at Mrs. Petrov, and Emily could see him weighing it, the risk and the reward, the danger and the possibility, 30 years of instinct warring inside him. "If this is a trap," he said finally to Mrs. Petrov, "if anything happens to her tonight, there is no place on this earth you can hide from me. Do you understand?" "I understand," the old woman said steadily, "but it isn't a trap. It's a promise, one I made a lifetime ago, to a woman braver than both of us." She reached out slowly and took Emily's hand in her own weathered one. "Your grandmother's last words to me were, 'Watch for the song I've watched for 30 years. And this morning, I finally heard it." Her eyes shone. "You have no idea how long I've waited to stop being afraid." Emily squeezed the old woman's hand, and for a moment the fear in the room gave way to something else, something that felt almost like family. But Adrian was already moving toward the window, already thinking 3 steps ahead, because he knew what neither of the women had yet said out loud. Salvatore had left uncertain, half believing. And a man like Salvatore did not stay uncertain for long. He would be watching the house, watching the gates, waiting to see if the maid with the pretty voice ever went anywhere she shouldn't. And tonight, she was about to. "We can't use the front gate," Adrian said quietly, more to himself than to them. "He'll have men watching it by dark, probably has them watching it already." He turned back to face the 2 women. "Getting her out of this house tonight without being seen is going to be the hardest thing I've done in years." He looked at Emily. "And if we're caught, if Salvatore's men see you leave and follow us to Vincent, then we won't just be risking your life. We'll be leading them straight to the last man who can prove what they did. We'll be handing them the chance to bury the truth forever." Emily met his eyes, and she did not look away, and Adrian saw in her face the same stubborn courage he had seen in a 50-year-old photograph of a woman standing in front of a stone building, refusing to be afraid. "Then we won't get caught," Emily said. And somewhere across the city, in a mansion built on old money and older blood, Salvatore was already lifting a telephone to his ear, already giving the orders that would put 4 cars and 8 men in the shadows around the Romano estate before the sun went down, because 30 years of survival had taught him one thing above all others, and it was that a lie told too smoothly was still a lie. And Adrian Romano had smiled at him one heartbeat too easily when he'd said the words, "a maid with a pretty voice." The old man set down the phone and folded his hands and waited for the dark. They left the mansion at 9 o'clock that night, and they did not use a door. Adrian took them down through the wine cellar, past racks of bottles older than Emily's whole life, to a section of the stone wall that looked no different from the rest until he pressed against it and it swung inward, revealing a passage that smelled of earth and cold and time. "This house is 140 years old," Adrian said quietly, moving ahead of her with a small light. "The men who built it were smugglers. They built ways out that don't appear on any blueprint. I'm one of 3 people alive who knows this one exists. And now I'm the 4th, Emily said. Now you're the 4th. He glanced back at her. "Which tells you something about how much I've decided to trust you. Don't make me regret it." Mrs. Petrov did not come with them. She had wanted to, had begged to, but Adrian had refused. "If they're watching," he'd told her, "and the housekeeper vanishes the same night as the maid, they'll know something is happening. You stay, you act normal, you keep the lights on and the routines running. You're our cover." And so the old woman had stayed behind, pressing a slip of paper into Emily's hand with an address on it and a whispered blessing, watching them disappear into the wall with tears standing in her eyes. The passage came out 2 blocks away, inside an old boarded-up bakery that Adrian apparently owned through a chain of names too tangled to follow. A car was waiting, not one of his expensive ones. An ordinary sedan, gray and forgettable, the kind of car no one looks at twice. "Get in the back," Adrian said. "Lie down. Don't sit up until I tell you." Emily obeyed. She lay across the back seat with her heart hammering, staring at the worn fabric of the ceiling as the engine turned over and the car pulled out into the Chicago night. It was 9:15. For the first 10 minutes, Adrian said nothing, and Emily could feel the tension coming off him in waves. He was watching the mirrors. She could tell from the way his eyes kept flicking up, from the careful, unhurried way he drove, making turns that seemed to lead nowhere, doubling back, testing. "Are we being followed?" she finally asked from the floor. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's the honest answer. There was a car outside the estate. It didn't move when we left, because we didn't leave, not that they could see. But Salvatore is thorough. There could be others. There could be someone on the bakery I don't know about." He made another turn. "Give me a few more minutes. If we're clean, I'll tell you." Emily lay in the dark and waited, and in the waiting, a question that had been building in her all day finally forced its way out. "Adrian," she said, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "That man Salvatore, you said he was there. The night my family died, the night your mother died." She swallowed. "If you've spent 30 years hunting the people who did it, and he's been right there the whole time, one of the men you meet with, one of the men you do business with, then how did you never know? How did you sit across from your mother's killer for 20 years and not feel it?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and raw. "Because I was a child when it happened," he said. 8 years old, hiding under a bed. I heard voices, but I never saw faces. And afterward, the people who raised me, the people who took me in and made me what I am, they told me a story. They told me my family was killed by outsiders, rivals from the old country, men who were all dead now, they said. They gave me a war that was already over, a grief with no one left to blame. His hands tightened on the wheel. And I believed it. For 30 years I believed it. I built my whole life around a lie, and I never questioned it, because the people who told it to me were the only family I had left. Emily felt something cold move through her. "Adrian," she said slowly, "the people who raised you, the people who took you in after your mother died, and told you that lie." She could barely say it. "Who were they?" There was a silence in the car so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. "Salvatore," Adrian said finally, "was the man who found me under that bed. Salvatore was the man who pulled me out of the ashes of my mother's house and raised me as his own." His voice cracked, just slightly, and then hardened into something terrible. "I have called that man family for 30 years. I have trusted him more than anyone alive. And today, I realize that the man who murdered my mother is the same man who tucked me in at night and taught me everything I know and told me he loved me like a son." He exhaled slowly. "So that's your answer, Emily." "That's how I never knew. Because the truth was too monstrous for a child to imagine, and by the time I stopped being a child, the lie had become the only foundation I had." Emily lay in the dark, stunned into silence. She had thought her own morning had been the strangest thing that could happen to a person. But this man had discovered in a single day that his entire life had been built by the hand that killed his mother. "I'm sorry," she whispered. It was all she had. "Don't be sorry," Adrian said. "Be careful, because now you understand what we're up against. It isn't strangers, Emily. It's family, the most dangerous enemy there is." It was 9:35 when he finally said, "We're clean. No one followed. You can sit up now, but stay away from the windows." Emily pulled herself up onto the seat, keeping to the shadows, and looked out at a part of the city she didn't recognize. They were somewhere on the far south side, in a neighborhood of shuttered storefronts and empty lots, the kind of place the city had forgotten. Adrian pulled the car to the curb in front of a narrow brick building with a faded sign she couldn't read. "This is it?" she asked. "This is the address Petrov gave you." He killed the engine. "Vincent lives above an old pharmacy that closed 20 years ago. He never leaves. He hasn't left, from what I understand, in over a decade. Too many people would recognize him. Too many people still want him dead." Adrian turned to look at her. "Before we go in, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If this goes wrong, if I tell you to run, you run. You don't argue, you don't look back, you don't try to save me. You run, and you get to your brother, and you disappear, because you are the one thing in this whole nightmare that matters. You're the record. You're the last page. Everything your grandmother did, everything my mother died for, it all comes down to keeping you breathing. So if it comes to a choice between you and me, there is no choice. Do you understand?" Emily looked at him, this cold, broken, terrifying man who had wept at her song that morning and was now offering to die for her tonight, and she felt something in her chest she didn't have a name for. "That's not fair," she said quietly. "You don't get to decide that your life matters less than mine." "I've decided a lot of unfair things in my life," Adrian said. "Let me have this one." He opened his door. "Come on, we don't have much time." The stairs up to Vincent's apartment were narrow and steep, and they creaked under every step, and by the time they reached the top, Emily's nerves were stretched so thin she thought she might scream. Adrian knocked, a specific pattern, 3 and then 2 and then 1, and they waited. For a long moment, nothing. Then a voice from behind the door, thin and old and sharp as broken glass. "Who's there?" "Rosa Marino's granddaughter," Adrian said quietly, "and a friend." Another silence. Then the sound of locks turning, one after another. 4 of them, 5, 6, and the door opened on a chain, and a single eye looked out at them, pale and watery and ancient. That eye found Emily's face, and Emily watched it change. "My God," the old man breathed. "My God, it's you. It's really you." The chain rattled off, the door swung open, and Vincent stood before them, a tiny, stooped man wrapped in a cardigan 3 sizes too big, his hands shaking, his face wet with sudden tears. "You have her eyes," he whispered. "You have Rosa's eyes. After all this time, she sent you to me." "You knew my grandmother," Emily said, and it came out broken, because she was so tired of learning that everyone in the world had known her grandmother except her. "Knew her?" Vincent laughed, a wheezing, watery sound. "Child, I loved your grandmother for 60 years. Come in quickly, before the whole street sees you standing in my doorway. Come in and let an old man look at the miracle he stopped believing would ever come. It was 9:50 when they stepped inside, and Vincent bolted the door behind them, all 6 locks, his hands moving with the practiced speed of a man who had spent decades afraid. The apartment was small and crowded and smelled of old paper and medicine. Vincent moved them to a sagging couch and lowered himself into a worn armchair across from them, never taking his eyes off Emily, as though he was afraid she might vanish if he blinked. "Petrov called me this morning," he said. "She told me she'd heard the song. I didn't believe her. God forgive me. I thought the old woman had finally lost her mind, hearing ghosts. But here you are." He shook his head slowly. "Here you are." "Mr. Vincent," Emily said gently, "I need to understand. All of it. My grandmother never told me anything. I didn't even know my real name until today. Please, I need you to tell me what happened. To my family, to Adrian's mother, to everyone." Vincent's face darkened, and something old and painful moved across it. He looked at Adrian for the first time, really looked at him, and his eyes narrowed. "And you," he said slowly. "You I know too. Not your face, but your name. Romano." He said it like a curse. "You're one of them." Adrian went very still. "I'm not one of them. You were raised by them. Salvatore's boy. Everyone knew. The child Salvatore pulled from the fire and made his heir." Vincent's hands gripped the arms of his chair. "Do you have any idea, boy, what it does to an old man's heart? To see Rosa's granddaughter walk through my door hand in hand with Salvatore Romano's son?" "I'm not his son," Adrian said, and his voice shook with something Emily had never heard in it before. "I share no blood with that man, and I found out today, for the first time in my life, that he is the one who killed my mother. So whatever you think you know about me, whatever hatred you've carried for the name Romano, understand this. He took my mother from me the same night he took Emily's family. He raised me on a lie, and I have come here tonight to help her burn his whole world to the ground." He leaned forward. "So you can trust me or not, old man, but we are on the same side. We have always been on the same side. We just didn't know it until today." Vincent stared at him for a long, long moment, and then, slowly, the suspicion in his ancient face gave way to something else. Grief. Recognition. "Your mother," Vincent said softly. "Sophia. Sophia Romano." He closed his eyes. "I knew her. Sweet God, I knew her too. She and Rosa were like sisters. They grew up on the same street, sang the same songs over the same garden wall." He opened his eyes, and they were wet. "You have her mouth. Did anyone ever tell you that? When you spoke just now, so angry, so hurt, I saw Sophia in you. She had that same fire, right up until the end." Adrian's composure cracked. Emily watched it happen, watched 30 years of ice split down the middle. "You knew my mother," he whispered. "You knew her name. No one has said her name to me in 30 years. Salvatore forbade it. He said grief was weakness. He said I had to forget her to become strong." His voice broke completely. "I don't even remember what she looked like anymore. I've forgotten her face. I have one photograph, and every year it gets harder to believe it was real." Vincent rose from his chair, slowly, painfully, and shuffled to a cabinet in the corner. He opened a drawer and took out a small tin box, rusted at the edges, and carried it back and set it in Adrian's hands. "Then let me give you something Salvatore could never take," the old man said. "Open it." Adrian opened the box with hands that would not stay steady. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, old and cracked and precious. He lifted the top one, and Emily saw his whole body go rigid. "That's her," he breathed. "That's my mother." He looked up at Vincent, and he was crying openly now. This man who ruled a city through fear, weeping like the 8-year-old boy he had never been allowed to be. "Where did you get these?" "Rosa saved them," Vincent said. "The night everything burned, she went back. Everyone told her it was madness, that she'd be killed. But she went back into that house while it was still smoking, and she saved what she could. Papers, photographs, anything that proved the families had existed. Because she understood even then that the men who did this wanted more than to kill us. They wanted to erase us, to make it as if we had never lived at all. He nodded at the box in Adrian's hands. Your mother's photographs have been in a box in a drawer in this apartment for 30 years, boy, waiting for someone with the right to claim them. I never thought it would be you. His voice softened. But Rosa would be glad. She loved Sophia. She'd want Sophia's son to have his mother's face back. It was 10:15, and in a crowded little apartment above a dead pharmacy, the most feared man in Chicago held photographs of his murdered mother and wept, and Emily reached over and took his hand, and for a moment, none of them said anything at all. Then Vincent turned to Emily, and his face grew serious. "But you didn't come here for photographs," he said. "Petrov told you why you needed to come. She told you what only I can give you." "The words," Emily said, "the words to the song, the names." "The names," Vincent agreed. 100 years of them, hidden in a lullaby, so that no fire and no murder could ever fully erase this family from the earth. He leaned forward, his ancient eyes burning. "Your grandmother could not teach you the words because to speak them aloud in the wrong ears is to hand your enemies a map of everyone you're descended from. But she taught you the melody so that the door would still be open, so that someone who knew the words could someday teach them back to you." He reached out and took both her hands in his trembling ones. "I am the last person alive who knows them, Emily. When I die, they die with me, unless you learn them tonight." Emily's breath caught. "Then teach me, please, before it's too late." "It is more than a song," Vincent warned. "Once you know it, you become what your grandmother was, the keeper, the record, the living proof. And that is a heavy thing to carry. It makes you the most important person in this fight, and the most hunted. Are you certain you want it?" Emily thought of her grandmother, running for 50 years, dying with a false name. She thought of a family she had never known, erased, forgotten, murdered in the dark. She thought of the fire that had taken Adrian's mother and her own. "I'm certain," she said. "Teach me." And so, in that small apartment, with Adrian sitting silent beside her, clutching photographs of his mother, the old man began to sing. His voice was thin and cracked, but the melody was the same one Emily had known her whole life, the same one her grandmother had sung, the same one Sophia and Rosa had sung over a garden wall long ago. Only now there were words, old words, in a dialect Emily half understood, and as Vincent sang them, she began to understand that they were names. Name after name, generation after generation, woven into the music like beads on a string. Her great-grandmother, her great-great-grandfather, cousins and aunts and children, a whole family tree, 100 years deep, hidden in a lullaby. She sang them back. She stumbled, and Vincent corrected her, gently, patiently, and she sang them again, and slowly, name by name, the record passed from the dying old man into the living young woman, exactly as it had passed for 100 years, mouth to mouth, heart to heart, so that a family that had been declared dead would refuse, one more time, to die. It was 10:40 when Vincent reached the last verse, and his voice caught. "And here," he said, "here is where it gets hard, because the last names in the song are the newest, your mother, your grandmother, and there is room, Emily, at the very end for you. Rosa left a space. She always believed you would come, so the final name in the song, the one you must add yourself, the one no one has ever sung before, is yours." He looked at her with shining eyes. "Sing your own name into the record, child. Make yourself part of the 100 years, and then it will be complete." Emily's voice shook as she sang the final verse. She sang her grandmother's name, Rosa. She sang her mother's name, and then in the space that had waited for her whole life, she sang her own, Emily Marino. And as the last note faded, something happened in the room, something none of them could have explained, a feeling like a door closing softly after 100 years, like a circle finally joining, like a family that had been scattered to ash and shadow, finally coming home. Vincent was weeping. Adrian was weeping, and Emily sat very still. The weight of 100 years settled onto her shoulders, and understood at last who she was. "It's done," Vincent whispered. "It's done. You are the record now. Whatever happens to me, whatever happens to any of us, the family cannot be erased, not anymore. Not as long as you're alive." He gripped her hands, "Which is why you must be so careful. Do you understand now, child, why they want you dead? Not for who you are, for what you carry. As long as you live and sing, they never truly won, and men like Salvatore cannot bear to have lost." It was 10:50 when Vincent's expression changed. He fell silent, mid-sentence, his head tilting, his old eyes going sharp and frightened in a way that made Emily's blood run cold. "What is it?" Adrian said immediately, already rising. "A car," Vincent whispered, "on the street. It stopped." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "In 30 years, no car has ever stopped on this street at night. No one comes here. No one." His hands began to shake violently. "Someone knows. Someone followed you." Adrian was at the window in an instant, standing to the side, looking down without showing himself. And Emily saw his whole body go rigid, saw the color drain from his face, and knew before he said a word that everything had just gone terribly wrong. "2 cars," Adrian said very quietly. 4 men getting out of each. 8 men. He turned from the window, and his eyes found Emily's, and in them she saw a terrible truth. "We were clean. I swear to you, we were clean. No one followed us from the bakery. I checked a dozen times." His jaw clenched. "Which means they didn't follow us here." "Then how?" Emily started. "They already knew this address," Adrian said, and the horror of it settled over all 3 of them at once. Someone told them. Someone who knew where Vincent lived. Someone who knew that if the last Marino ever surfaced, this is where she'd be brought. He looked at Vincent, and his voice was hollow. "How many people in this world knew this address, old man? How many people knew you were still alive and living here?" Vincent's face had gone gray. 2, he whispered. "Only 2. Myself. And the one person I trusted to know, in case I ever died, and someone had to be told where the photographs were, where the truth was hidden." His hands flew to his mouth. "God forgive me. God forgive me," I told her. "I told her years ago. I never dreamed." "Told who?" Emily demanded, though a cold and terrible certainty was already rising in her chest. "Vincent, who did you tell?" And from the bottom of the narrow, creaking staircase, before the old man could answer, a voice drifted up to them. A woman's voice, familiar, warm, and utterly, unbearably wrong in that place. "Emily?" called Mrs. Petrov from the darkness at the foot of the stairs. "Emily, child, are you up there? Thank God I found you in time." Emily's heart stopped. Adrian's hand shot out and gripped her arm, holding her still, holding her silent, and his eyes were burning with a rage and a grief so deep she could hardly look at them. Because they both understood, in that single frozen instant, exactly what had happened. The housekeeper who had wept and taken Emily's hand and spoken of promises made to a brave dead woman. The housekeeper who had given them the address. The housekeeper who had stayed behind, alone, in the mansion, with a telephone. "She played us," Adrian breathed, so quietly only Emily could hear. "Every word, the tears, the story about your grandmother saving her life, all of it. She was never protecting you. She was the one who called Salvatore this morning, and she just led 8 men straight to the last 3 people alive who know the truth." At the bottom of the stairs, Mrs. Petrov's voice called up again, sweet and patient and cold as the grave. "Come down now, Emily," she said. "It's over. It's finally over. 50 years I've waited to finish what we started. Come down, child. Don't make the men come up and get you." For one endless second, no one in that small apartment moved. Then Adrian's mind, honed by 30 years of survival, snapped into motion. He pulled Emily close and put his mouth to her ear. "The photographs, the tin box, take it. Everything Vincent saved, everything that proves what they did, it goes with you. It doesn't matter what happens to me or the old man. That box and the song in your head are the only weapons we have. Do you understand? Adrian, do you understand?" She nodded, tears blurring her eyes, and clutched the rusted tin box to her chest. Vincent had risen from his chair, and for a man who had not left his apartment in over a decade, he moved with sudden, terrible purpose. He shuffled to the same cabinet where he'd kept the photographs and pulled open a lower drawer, and when he turned back, there was an old revolver in his shaking hand. "There's another way out," he whispered. "There's always another way out. A man who spent 30 years hiding does not live in a place with only one door." He gestured toward the small kitchen at the back. "Behind the pantry shelf. It opens onto the fire escape of the building next door. It drops into the alley. Go, both of you, now." "Come with us," Emily begged. "Vincent, please come with us." The old man smiled, and it was the saddest smile Emily had ever seen. "Child, I can barely make it across this room," he said gently. "I would slow you down, and you would die trying to save me, and then everything would be for nothing." He pressed the revolver's grip more firmly into his own palm. But an old man with a gun at the top of a narrow staircase can buy two young people a great deal of time. It is the only useful thing left in me. Let me spend it. It was 10:53, and at the bottom of the stairs, Mrs. Petrov's patience was running out. "Emily!" she called again, and the warmth was gone from her voice now, replaced by something flat and cold. "I'm not a cruel woman. I don't want the men to hurt you more than they have to, but my patience and theirs has limits. Come down. It's the only mercy you'll get tonight." Adrian pulled Emily toward the kitchen, but she twisted in his grip, staring back at Vincent, unable to make her feet move. "I can't just leave him," she whispered. "I just found him. He's the only person left who knew her. I can't—" "You have to," Adrian said, and his voice cracked. "That's what he's telling you. That's what your grandmother did, Emily. She left people behind so that others could live. That's how any of us are here at all. Someone stayed. Someone always stays." He held her face in his hands for one desperate second. "Don't let his sacrifice be for nothing. Run." From below came the sound of the front door being kicked in, wood splintering, and then Mrs. Petrov's voice, sharp and commanding. "Up the stairs, all of you. The girl has a tin box and a head full of names, and I want both. Bring her to me alive if you can, but if you can't—" A pause. "Then make sure the box survives at least, and make sure she never sings again." Vincent moved to the top of the stairs with his revolver raised, and he called down into the dark in a voice that had found at the very end a strength that decades of fear had buried. "Isabella Petrov," he called, "or whatever name you're using now. I know you can hear me. 60 years I've carried a suspicion I could never prove. That the night the families died, someone opened the door for the killers from the inside, someone the family trusted, someone who was supposed to be one of us." His voice rose. "It was you, wasn't it? It was always you. You didn't survive that night because Rosa saved you. You survived because you were working for them. And you've spent 30 years in that boy's house, waiting for the one thing that could finish the job, the last merino." There was a silence from below, and then Mrs. Petrov's voice floated up, and it was almost amused. "You always were too clever for your own good, Vincent," she said. "Yes, it was me. I opened the door. I was 17, and they promised me money and a life, and freedom from being a servant in a house where I'd die a servant." A cold laugh. "Rosa never knew. Sophia never knew. They died thinking I was one of them, and I've spent every day since making sure their family stayed buried, so no one would ever learn what I did." Her voice hardened. "And I was so close. 30 years of loose ends, all tied off, all silent. And then this stupid girl walked into that house and started to sing. Do you know what I felt when I heard that song this morning, Vincent? Not fear, relief, because it meant I could finally finish it. The last thread, the last name." It was 10:56, and Emily, frozen in the kitchen doorway, felt something break and then harden inside her chest. Every gentle word the old woman had spoken that day, every tear, every tender squeeze of her hand had been a knife wrapped in silk. The story about loving her grandmother, the story about promises made over a garden wall, all of it a performance designed to win Emily's trust and lead her straight to the one place where everyone who knew the truth could be killed at once. "She used my grandmother's memory," Emily whispered, and her voice was shaking, but not with fear anymore, with rage. She sat in that room and made me cry over a lie. She turned the person I loved most into bait." "I know," Adrian said grimly, pulling at her arm. "And you can hate her with everything you have. But hate her while you're running, not while you're dying. Move." Vincent fired the first shot down the stairwell, and the sound of it in that enclosed space was deafening. There was a shout from below, a scramble, the confusion of men who had not expected the old ghost to have teeth. And in that confusion, Adrian shoved the pantry shelf aside, revealing the narrow gap Vincent had promised, and pushed Emily through it into the cold night air of the fire escape. "Go down," he said. "I'm right behind you. Don't wait for me. If we get separated, you go to the car, you drive, you get to your brother. Don't come back for me. Swear it." "I won't swear that, Emily. I won't." She grabbed the front of his coat with her free hand, the tin box clutched in the other. "I've spent my whole life letting people leave. My parents left. My grandmother left. Everyone I've ever loved has left me alone, and I have been alone my whole life, and I am done. So you don't get to tell me to leave you behind. We go together, or we don't go at all." Adrian stared at her, and something moved across his face, something that in another life, in another world, might have had time to become love. But there was no time. Behind them, another gunshot cracked, and then a burst of return fire, and then a silence far more terrible than any noise. Vincent had stopped shooting. Emily's breath caught in a sob. "No, no, Vincent." "He bought us the time," Adrian said hoarsely. "Don't waste it. Please, Emily. Don't let it be for nothing. Go." And so they went, down the fire escape, into the alley, the tin box clutched to Emily's chest, her tears freezing on her face in the cold. Above them, through the window they'd left behind, they could hear Mrs. Petrov's voice, no longer patient, no longer warm, screaming at her men. "The box! Where's the box? Where is she? Find them! They went out the back. They had to. Find them! Find them now!" It was 11 o'clock when Adrian and Emily reached the mouth of the alley, and Adrian pulled up short, throwing out an arm to stop her. Because there, at the end of the alley, blocking the way to the street where they'd left the car, stood a single figure, an old man with silver hair combed straight back. Salvatore. He was alone. He held no weapon. He simply stood there, in a long, dark coat, waiting, as though he had all the time in the world. "Adrian," Salvatore said, and his voice carried that same warm, patient tone he'd used in the mansion that morning. "I had a feeling you'd come out this way. You always did have a good instinct for exits. I taught you that." He spread his hands. "I taught you everything." Adrian pushed Emily behind him, putting his body between her and the old man. "Get out of the way, Salvatore." "I don't think I will." Salvatore's eyes moved past Adrian to Emily, and they fixed on the tin box in her arms, and something hungry flickered in them. "So it's true, the last merino, and Rosa's little box of ghosts, the one we could never find all these years. She's brought it right to me." He smiled. "How thoughtful." "You killed my mother," Adrian said, and his voice was terrible, low and shaking with 30 years of buried grief. "You pulled me out of that fire, and you raised me, and you told me you loved me, and the whole time you were the one who lit the match." For the first time, something like genuine feeling crossed Salvatore's face. "I did love you," he said quietly. "That was never a lie, Adrian. When I found you under that bed, this small, terrified thing, I could have finished it. My orders were to leave no survivors. But I looked at you, and I couldn't." He shook his head. "So I told them the boy died in the fire, and I took you home, and I raised you as my own. Everything I have, everything I built it to give to you. You were the one good thing I ever did in a life full of terrible things. Do you understand? I am the reason you're alive." "You're the reason I'm alone," Adrian said. "You took my mother, and then you took the truth, and then you had the cruelty to raise me to love you for it. There's no love in that, Salvatore. There's only ownership. You didn't save me. You collected me." Salvatore's face hardened. "Think what you like. But the fact remains, I made you what you are. And what you are, Adrian, is a Romano, my heir, the most powerful man in this city." He took a step forward. "Which is why I'm giving you a choice right here, right now. The girl and the box, or 30 years of everything I built for you. Hand her to me. Walk away. Go back to your empire and your power and the life I gave you, and forget you ever heard that song. Or throw it all away, everything, for a maid you met this morning." His voice dropped. "Choose carefully, my son, because there is no third path down this alley." It was 11:04, and Emily felt the whole world narrow to that single moment. She could see Adrian's shoulders, rigid in front of her. She could feel the weight of the box in her arms and the weight of 100 names in her head. And she understood that whatever Adrian said next would decide everything, not just her life, but the truth of who he was. For a long, agonizing moment, Adrian said nothing, and then he laughed. It was a low, broken, disbelieving sound. "You still don't understand," Adrian said. "After 30 years, you still don't understand a single thing about me. You think you gave me power, but you gave me a cage. You think you gave me a life, but you gave me a lie." And this morning, for the first time in 30 years, a woman I'd never met sang my mother's song in my house, and I remembered what it felt like to be human, to feel something, to care whether someone lived or died. He reached back and found Emily's hand and held it. "You want to know my choice, Salvatore? There was never a choice. You made sure of that the night you murdered my mother. I've been yours for 30 years, but I'm not yours anymore. I'm hers. I'm theirs. I'm the son of Sofia Romano and the friend of Rosa Marino's blood, and I would rather die in this alley tonight than spend one more day being the thing you made me." Salvatore's face went cold and empty, all warmth draining away, and what was left underneath was the face of the man who had walked into a burning house 30 years ago and killed everyone he found. "Then you'll die in this alley," he said simply. "Both of you." He raised his hand, and from the shadows behind him, 2 men stepped forward, and the streetlight caught the metal in their hands. "I'd hoped it wouldn't come to this, but I've buried people I loved before. I can do it again." It was 11:06, and everything happened at once. Adrian shoved Emily hard, back toward the alley, back the way they'd come, and shouted a single word, "Run!" And then he threw himself forward, toward Salvatore and the 2 armed men, an unarmed man charging into gunfire, buying with his own body the only thing he had left to give her: time. Emily ran. She did not want to. Every cell in her body screamed at her to turn back, to help him, to not leave one more person to die alone. But she heard his voice in her head, saw his face, remembered what Vincent had done, and what her grandmother had done, and what every person who had ever loved this family had done. They stayed so that others could run, and the only way to make it mean something was to survive. So she ran, clutching the box, back down the alley, her lungs burning, her feet slipping on the wet ground. Behind her, she heard shouting, a crash, the terrible sound of a struggle. She did not look back. She reached the fire escape they'd come down and kept going, past it, deeper into the maze of alleys behind the dead pharmacy, running blind through a part of the city she didn't know, with 100 years of names in her head and a box of ghosts in her arms. And then, ahead of her, headlights. She skidded to a stop, her heart seizing, a car turning into the alley, blocking her path. She was trapped. She spun to run the other way and saw figures moving at the far end, silhouettes against the streetlight. Petrov's men. They'd circled around. They'd found her. She was caught between them, in the dark, alone, with nowhere left to run. It was 11:09, and Emily Marino did the only thing left to do. She turned to face them, pressed her back against the cold brick wall, held the tin box against her chest like a shield, and she began to sing. She did not sing softly this time. She did not sing under her breath, the way she had that morning while cleaning a piano, thinking no one could hear. She sang at the top of her lungs, her voice ringing off the brick and the metal and the wet ground, the old melody rising into the night, and she sang the words Vincent had given her, every name, every generation, 100 years of a family that refused to be erased. She sang her great-grandmother and her great-great-grandfather. She sang the cousins and the aunts and the children. She sang Rosa. She sang her mother. And she sang her own name loud and clear and unafraid into the darkness. Because if they were going to kill her, if this was the end of the last Marino, then she was going to make sure that the last thing these men ever heard from her was the very thing they had killed her family to silence. The proof that they had never won. The record, sung out loud in the open, where anyone might hear it. The men slowed. She saw them hesitate, glancing at one another, unnerved by the sight of a young woman standing alone against a wall, singing a dead family's song into the night with tears streaming down her face, and no fear left in her at all. And then, from the car with the headlights, a door opened. A figure stepped out, and Emily braced herself for the end. But the voice that came was not Petrov's, and it was not Salvatore's, and it was not any of the men who wanted her dead. "Keep singing," the voice said. Young, steady, a woman's voice. "Don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop singing. I'm getting you out of here." Emily's voice faltered in shock. A young woman came into the light, moving fast, and behind her came others, 4, 5 of them, hard-faced and quick, placing themselves between Emily and the men at the end of the alley. "Who are you?" Emily gasped. The young woman reached her, took her arm, and pulled her toward the car. "My name is Elena," she said, "and I've been looking for you for a very long time." She glanced at the tin box in Emily's arms, and her eyes widened, and something like tears came into them. "You have it. You actually have it, my God, after all these years." "I don't understand," Emily said, stumbling toward the car. "I don't understand anything. Who are you? How did you find me?" Elena pushed her into the back seat and climbed in after her, and as the car reversed hard out of the alley, tires screaming, leaving Petrov's confused men behind, she turned to Emily with an expression that shattered everything Emily thought she understood. "Because I'm a Marino, too," Elena said. "Rosa wasn't the only one who survived that night, Emily. She thought she was. That's what she was told, so she'd stop looking, so she'd stay hidden and stay safe. But there was another, a cousin, a little boy, smuggled out a different door, raised in a different city, under a different name." Her voice broke. "That little boy was my father, and he spent his whole life searching for any other survivor, for any sign that we weren't the last. He died 2 years ago, still searching." She reached out and gripped Emily's hand. And then, this morning, an old woman named Petrov made a phone call to a man named Vincent. And Vincent, God bless his suspicious old heart, called me first, before he called anyone else. Because Vincent never fully trusted Petrov either. He'd been waiting 30 years to find out if his suspicion was right. Elena's eyes shone. "He sent me the address and told me to come. He told me if a girl who knew the song ever surfaced, I needed to find her before they did. He must have known, even then. He must have suspected Petrov would betray you. So he gave the old woman the address to draw her out, to finally prove what she was. And he gave me the address too, to save the one thing that mattered." She looked at the box and then at Emily. "You, the record, the last page." She smiled through her tears. "Except you're not the last page anymore, cousin. Because you're not the last Marino. You never were. There are more of us, scattered, hidden, waiting. And now finally we have the song again. We have the names. We have the proof." Her grip tightened. "And we are not going to run anymore." It was 11:15, and Emily Marino sat in the back of a speeding car, clutching a box of ghosts, staring at the face of a cousin she had never known existed. And for the first time in her entire life, she understood that she was not alone. She had never been alone. A family she thought was dead was reaching out to her from across 30 years of shadow, and it was not gone, and it was not erased, and it was not afraid anymore. But even as the relief flooded through her, even as she gripped Elena's hand and felt the miracle of not being the last, one thought cut through everything else, sharp and cold and unbearable. "Adrian," she said suddenly, twisting to look out the back window at the alley disappearing behind them. "We have to go back. He's still there. He charged Salvatore and 2 armed men with nothing, with his bare hands to give me time to run. He's still back there, Elena. We can't leave him. Please. He saved my life. He gave up everything, his whole life, everything that man built for him, and he chose me. He chose us, and we cannot leave him to die in that alley alone." Elena's face grew grave, and she exchanged a look with the driver, and something unspoken passed between them. "Emily," she said carefully, "the man you're talking about, Adrian Romano, Salvatore's heir." She hesitated. "Do you have any idea what you're asking? Do you know what my family has spent 30 years believing about the Romanos? They are the enemy. Salvatore Romano is the man who gave the order that killed your grandmother's family and mine. And Adrian is his son, his heir, the man he raised to inherit everything." Her voice was gentle but firm. "You're asking us to turn this car around and go back into a gunfight to save the son of the man who murdered our family." "He's not his son," Emily said fiercely. "Not in blood, not in heart, not anymore. He found out today, Elena, today, for the first time, that Salvatore killed his mother. His mother was Sofia. Sofia Romano. She grew up beside my grandmother. They sang the song to each other over a garden wall when they were girls. Adrian's mother and my grandmother were like sisters, and they were murdered the same night by the same man. Adrian lost his family that night too. He just didn't know it for 30 years. She grabbed Elena's arm. "And the moment he learned the truth, he chose us. Salvatore stood in that alley and offered him everything, his whole empire, his whole life, in exchange for handing me over. And Adrian looked his own father in the eye and said no. He said he'd rather die than be what Salvatore made him. And then he charged 3 armed men with his bare hands so I could get away." Her voice broke completely. "So don't tell me he's the enemy. He is the bravest man I have ever known, and he is dying back there right now, alone, for me, for us, for a family he didn't even know he belonged to until this morning, and I am not going to leave him. I left Vincent. I had to leave Vincent, and it will haunt me for the rest of my life. I will not leave Adrian too." The car was silent for a long moment, tearing through the dark streets, and Emily watched Elena's face war with itself, watched 30 years of inherited hatred struggle against the story she'd just been told. And then Elena leaned forward and put her hand on the driver's shoulder. "Turn around," she said quietly. "Elena," the driver started. "Turn the car around," Elena said again, and her voice was steel. "If what she's saying is true, if Sofia Romano's son threw away everything to save the last of us, then he's not a Romano. He's one of ours, and we do not leave our own behind. Not anymore. Not ever again." She looked at Emily, and something fierce and new burned in her eyes. "That ends tonight." The car turned around, and as it raced back toward the alley, back toward the gunfire and the man who had given up his whole world for a maid who sang a song, Emily gripped the tin box in her lap and prayed to a grandmother she had never truly known, prayed to a family she had only just found, prayed with everything in her heart that they would not be too late. The alley was quiet when they returned, and the quiet was the most terrifying thing Emily had ever heard. The car skidded to a stop at the mouth of it, and Emily was out before it had fully stopped, running into the dark, screaming his name. "Adrian! Adrian, where are you?" Elena and her men poured out behind her, weapons drawn, moving fast and low, but Emily did not wait for them. She ran into the shadows where she had last seen him charge 3 armed men with nothing but his hands and his fury. It was 11:22. She found him against the wall, slumped, one hand pressed to his side, and when she saw the dark stain spreading beneath his fingers, a sound came out of her that she had never made before, half scream and half sob. "No, no, no, no." She dropped to her knees beside him, the tin box tumbling from her arms. "Adrian, look at me, please." His eyes fluttered open, and they found her face, and something in them steadied. "You came back," he whispered. "I told you to run." "I'm done listening to you," she said, pressing her own hands over his, over the wound, trying to hold the life inside him by sheer will. "You don't get to give up everything for me and then die alone in an alley. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works." Her tears fell on his face. "Where's Salvatore? Where did he go?" Adrian's jaw tightened with pain. "Gone. I got the gun away from one of his men, fired at the wall, made enough noise, enough chaos that they scattered. Salvatore doesn't fight his own battles. The moment it got loud, the moment there was risk to him, he ran. He always runs." a bitter, bloody smile. "That's the thing he never taught me, how to run. I never learned it. I don't know how." "Then it's a good thing you have people who do," Elena said, dropping down on his other side. She tore open his shirt with practiced hands, examined the wound, and let out a breath. "It's bad, but it's not the end. It missed everything that matters. He needs a doctor now, but he's not going to die in this alley." She looked up at her men. "Get him in the car, carefully." Adrian's eyes moved to Elena, taking in her face the resemblance he must have seen there. "You're one of them," he said hoarsely. "A Merino. There are more of you." "There are more of us," Elena agreed. "Thanks to you, there's one more still breathing tonight than there would have been." She held his gaze. "My family has hated your name for 30 years, Adrian Romano, but a man is not his name. My cousin told me what you did, what you gave up." Something in her hard face softened. "So we're going to save your life, and then you're going to help us finish what Salvatore started, by ending it. For good. All of it." It was 11:29 when they got him into the car, and Emily held his head in her lap the whole way, murmuring to him, keeping him awake. And somewhere in the rush through the dark streets, she began, without quite deciding to sing. The old melody, her grandmother's song, Sophia's song, and Adrian, drifting in and out, hearing his mother's lullaby sung by the woman who had saved him by singing it that very morning, held on to consciousness and onto her hand, and did not let go of either. The weeks that followed were the strangest and most important of Emily Marino's life. Adrian recovered slowly, in a safe house Elena's family had kept ready for decades, a place off every map and every record. And as he healed, the three of them, and the wider family Emily was only beginning to discover, began to build the thing that would finally end it. Because Emily had walked out of that alley with more than her life. She had walked out with the tin box, and inside that box, along with the photographs, were the papers Rosa had run back into a burning house to save 30 years ago. Names, dates, records of accounts, proof, in a dead woman's careful hand, of exactly who had ordered the murders and exactly who had profited from them. And the name at the top of every page was Salvatore. "This is enough to destroy him," Elena said one night, spreading the papers across a table, while Adrian, pale but upright now, studied them. "But not through the courts. Men like Salvatore own the courts. This has to be done another way." Adrian looked up, and Emily saw the old sharpness return to his eyes. The strategist, the man who had survived 30 years in a world built on knives. But it was different now. It was aimed at last in the right direction. "He raised me," Adrian said quietly, "which means I know every account he hides, every man he owns, every secret he thinks is buried. He taught me his whole empire because he wanted me to inherit it." A cold smile. "So let me inherit it. Let me take it all away from him piece by piece and hand it to the people he tried to erase. He built his power on the graves of the Marinos. Let the Marinos take it back." It was slow and it was dangerous, and more than once Emily thought they would all be killed before it was finished. But one by one, the pieces came apart. Adrian knew where the money was, and the money moved. Adrian knew which men Salvatore had bought, and one by one, with the proof from Rosa's box, those men were turned or removed. The empire that had stood for 30 years, built on a single terrible night, began to crumble from the inside, and the old man at the center of it could not understand why, because the person taking it apart was the one person he had never imagined could betray him, the son he had raised, the heir he had made. And through it all, Emily was not hidden away. She refused to be. She had spent her whole life invisible, and she was finished with it. She sat at every table where decisions were made. She learned the family's history, its business, its responsibilities. She was clumsy at first, and doubted and underestimated by hard people who could not believe that a maid who had scrubbed floors a month ago now sat among them as the keeper of the family's oldest secret. But Emily proved over and over that leadership was not a thing you inherited with money. It was a thing you built with courage. She earned their respect not because of her blood, but because of how she carried it. And she never stopped visiting Daniel. Her brother recovered too, in the best hospital in the country. His treatment finally, fully paid, guarded around the clock by men who never left his door. And when he was strong enough, Emily brought him into the family she had found and told him everything, and taught him, slowly, the beginning of the song. Because the record could not rest on one person alone. Not anymore. Rosa had learned that. Emily learned it too. A family that hid its truth in a single mouth could be silenced with a single bullet. So Emily did what her grandmother had been too afraid to do. She taught the song openly, to everyone, to Daniel and to Elena and to every Merino she could find, until the names were not a secret anymore but a chorus, until there was no longer any single person you could kill to make the family disappear. Salvatore had wanted to erase them. Emily made them impossible to erase. It was 3 months to the day after she first walked through the gates of the Romano mansion that it finally ended. Salvatore, his empire gone, his money seized, his loyal men turned or scattered, his power reduced to nothing, was left with only the truth he had spent 30 years hiding. And Emily made sure that truth reached everyone who mattered, not a courtroom. The world Salvatore lived in had its own justice, older and harder than any court, and in that world there was one crime that could never be forgiven: betrayal from the inside, the murder of families under the cover of trust. When the other powers of that world learned, from Rosa's careful papers, exactly what Salvatore had done 30 years ago, and understood that he had done it to seize what belonged to others, the protection that had kept him alive for 3 decades simply evaporated. No one would stand with him. No one would shelter him. He was at the very end exactly what he had made the Merinos: alone, hunted, erased. Emily did not watch what happened to him, and she did not ask. Some justice is better left unwitnessed. She only knew that the man who had murdered her family and Adrian's, who had raised a stolen child on a lie, who had spent 30 years making sure a brave woman's blood stayed buried, was gone and would never again reach for the last of the Merinos. But there was one thing Emily insisted on before the end. She went to see him. Once. Alone. Over every objection. She found him a diminished thing, an old man stripped of everything, and she stood before him, not with a weapon, but with the tin box in her hands. "Do you know what this is?" she asked him. Salvatore's cold eyes fixed on the box, and for the first time she saw fear in them. "Rosa's box," he said. "I spent 30 years looking for that box." "You did?" Emily opened it and let him see the photographs, the papers, the proof. "You looked for it because you knew that as long as it existed, you never truly won. You could kill the people, but you couldn't kill the truth. And that's what you never understood all these years." She closed the box. "You thought you were burying a family, but a family isn't a thing you can bury. It's not in the money or the power or the name. It's in the song. It's in the memory. It's in one frightened old woman running back into a burning house to save a handful of photographs so that someday her granddaughter would know who she was." Emily's voice was steady, and it did not shake. "You murdered everyone in that house 30 years ago, Salvatore, and you failed. Because I'm standing here, and I know my name, and I taught it to my brother, and to my cousin, and to everyone. You cannot unhear a song once enough people are singing it." She looked at him one last time. "You didn't erase us. You made us louder." And she turned and walked out, and she did not look back, and that was the last time Emily Merino ever laid eyes on the man who had tried to end her family. Adrian was waiting for her outside. He was healed now mostly, standing on his own, and when she came out, he searched her face. "Are you all right?" "I am," she said, and she was surprised to find it was true. "It's over." "It's over," he agreed, and then quietly, "What now, for you?" Emily thought about that. For the first time in her life, the question was not what will keep me alive, or what will keep Daniel alive, or how do I survive one more month. For the first time, the future was not a wall she was pressed against. It was open. "I want to do what my grandmother couldn't," she said. "I want to stop being afraid. I want to build something. A family that doesn't hide, that doesn't run, that takes everything Salvatore stole and turns it into something good, something that helps people instead of hurting them." She looked at him. "And I don't want to do it alone." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. And then this man who had spent 30 years behind walls, who had thrown beautiful women out of his home without a second thought, who had believed until 3 months ago that emotion was weakness and trust was death, looked at the maid who had walked into his house and sung his mother's song and cracked open a heart he thought had frozen solid forever. "When I first heard you sing," he said slowly, "I thought it was because of the song, because it was my mother's, because it was connected to everything I'd lost." He shook his head. "But that wasn't it. Not really. The song is why I stopped and listened. But it's not why I couldn't stop watching you afterward. It's not why I chose you in that alley over everything Salvatore ever gave me." He stepped closer. "You want to know the truth, Emily? Every beautiful woman in this city tried for years to reach me. They came with their designer clothes and their perfect faces and their endless wanting, and not one of them ever touched anything real in me, because there was nothing real left in me to touch. And then a tired girl in a cleaning uniform, who owned nothing, who wanted nothing from me, who didn't even know who I was, sang to an empty room because she was thinking of her brother." His voice was rough, and she reached the one thing 30 years of walls couldn't protect. Not because she was trying to, because she wasn't, because she was just being who she was. Kind, brave, real. He took her hand. "I don't want you to do it alone either. I never want to do anything alone again. I forgot how to feel, Emily. For 30 years I forgot. And you reminded me. You didn't do it with beauty or with power or with any of the things I was trained to want. You did it with a song and a good heart and the courage to look the most feared man in Chicago in the eye and tell him you didn't trust him." He almost laughed. "God help me. That was the moment. Right there, when you refused to trust me. That was when I knew you were the only person I ever could." Emily's eyes filled, but she was smiling. "That's the strangest thing anyone has ever said to me. I'm a strange man. You'll get used to it." And she did. It was 1 year later that Emily Marino stood in the great hall of the mansion where she had once, on a morning that felt like another lifetime, scrubbed a piano and thought no one could hear her sing. Everything was different now. The house was not a fortress anymore. It was full of people, full of light, full of the voices of a family that had come out of 30 years of hiding and refused to hide again. Cousins she had never known she had. Elena, who had become the closest thing to a sister Emily had ever had. Daniel, healthy and grown taller, laughing across the room. And the family's fortune, the pieces of Salvatore's empire that Adrian had taken apart and Emily had rebuilt into something clean, now went to hospitals and shelters and children who had no one, because Emily had decided that if her family was going to have power, it would be power that healed instead of power that frightened. She was no longer the woman nobody noticed. She was the woman who had united a scattered family, who had restored a legacy that murder could not erase, who had walked into the coldest heart in the city and taught it to beat again. And when the room grew quiet that evening and the family gathered close, Emily did the thing she had once done in secret and in fear, the thing that had changed everything. She sang. She sang the old Italian melody, the lullaby 100 years old, and this time she sang every word, every name, every generation, out loud and unafraid, and one by one the voices around her joined in. Daniel, Elena, the cousins, every Marino in the room singing the record together so that it could never be silenced again, so that no single death could ever end them, so that a family a murderer had tried to erase from the earth filled a mansion with the sound of its own survival. And Adrian stood beside her and listened, the way he had listened that first morning, except now there were no walls left, and no lies, and no 30 years of frozen grief between him and the music. There was only his mother's song, sung by the woman he loved, surrounded by a family that had become his own. He had lost everything to that song once, as a boy hiding under a bed, and he had found everything through it again, as a man who had finally learned how to feel. When the song ended, Emily looked around the room at all of them, at the impossible family she had found, at the man beside her, at her brother, alive and whole, and she understood at last the thing her grandmother had spent 50 years trying to protect, and had never quite dared to believe. The greatest power in the world is not inherited through money. It is not seized through fear. It cannot be bought by the wealthiest man or won by the most beautiful woman. It comes from staying true to who you are when the whole world tells you that you are nothing. It comes from a good heart that refuses to break. It comes from kindness that outlasts cruelty, and courage that outlasts fear, and a song that outlasts the men who tried to silence it. Emily Carter had walked into that mansion as a maid nobody noticed, carrying a bucket and a secret she didn't know she held. Emily Marino stood in it now as the woman who had saved her family, changed a broken man, and proved that a person's true worth is never measured by their place in life, but only ever by the heart they carry. And she had learned the lesson her grandmother died holding, the lesson Adrian had forgotten and found again, the lesson every person who tried to make her feel small had never understood. They had all looked at her and seen nothing, and she had turned out to be everything. It was 2 years after the song filled the mansion for the first time that Emily Marino learned she was going to become a mother. She told Adrian on an ordinary evening in the same great hall where she had once scrubbed floors, and she watched the news move across his face like sunrise across a dark room. For a long moment he could not speak at all. This man who had commanded a city through fear, who had negotiated with killers without blinking, simply stood there with his hand over his mouth and tears standing in his eyes. "A child," he finally whispered. "We're going to have a child." "We are." He crossed the room and took her face in his hands, and he was shaking. "I don't know how to be a father, Emily. I never had one. Not a real one. The only man who ever raised me was a monster who taught me that love was a leash. What do I know about being a father? What if I ruin it? What if there's something broken in me that I pass to a child who never asked for any of this?" Emily covered his hands with her own. "Adrian, do you know what a father is?" She smiled up at him. "A father is someone who charges 3 armed men with his bare hands so that someone he loves can run. A father is someone who gives up everything, his whole world, every scrap of power he was ever promised, and asks for nothing in return. You've already been a father to me, in every way that matters, since the night you told me you'd burn the city down before you let anything happen to me." She pressed his palm flat against her heart. "You're not broken. You were frozen, and you thawed. That's the whole difference. Our child will have a father who knows exactly what it costs to lose a family, which means our child will have a father who will never, ever take one for granted." Adrian pressed his forehead to hers, and for a long time neither of them said anything, and the great hall held them the way it had once held only cold and fear, except now it held something else entirely. The pregnancy was the happiest and most terrifying stretch of Emily's life. Elena moved into the mansion for the duration, refusing to leave her cousin's side, and the 2 women who had found each other in a speeding car on the worst night of their lives now spent their days planning a nursery and arguing about names and laughing until they cried. Daniel, 17 now, and healthy in a way Emily had once believed she would never see, appointed himself the child's protector before it was even born. "I'm going to be the best uncle who ever lived," he announced. "I've had a lot of practice being taken care of. Now it's my turn." But it was late one night, in the 7th month, that Emily faced the ghost she had been avoiding. She could not sleep, and she found herself walking the halls of the great house, one hand resting on the swell of her belly, and without deciding to, she ended up in the room with the piano, the room where it had all begun. She had not been able to bring herself to enter it in nearly 3 years. She stood in the doorway a long time, and then she went in, and she sat down at the piano, and she thought about her grandmother. "I wish you were here," she said out loud, to the empty room, to the woman who had run for 50 years and died with a false name. "I wish you could have seen all of it, Grandma. I wish you could have stopped being afraid. I wish you could have met Adrian and Elena and held Daniel when he was sick, and I wish, God, I wish you could be here when your great-grandchild is born." Her voice broke. "You gave up everything to keep me safe. You lived your whole life small and frightened and hidden so that I could live it all. And you never got to see that it worked. You never got to see that all your running led somewhere. It led here. It led to this, to a child who's going to grow up knowing exactly who they are, without any fear, because of everything you gave up. She wiped her face. I hope you know, wherever you are. I hope you can somehow know that you won. And then, because it was the only way she had ever known how to speak to her grandmother, she began to sing. She sang the old melody softly, one hand on the piano and one on her child, and she sang all the names, 100 years of them, and at the very end, she added something new. She sang the space where her child's name would go. She left it open, the way Rosa had once left a space open for her, a promise stretching forward into a future her grandmother had died to make possible. She did not hear Adrian come in. She only felt him suddenly, sitting beside her on the piano bench, his arm around her, and she realized he had been listening from the doorway. You left a space, he said quietly, the way she left one for me. Emily leaned into him. That's what the song is, Adrian. It's not just a record of who came before, it's a promise about who comes next. Every generation leaves a space for the one that follows. That's how you know a family isn't dead, not because of the names already in the song, because there's still room left to add more. Adrian was quiet for a moment, and then he said, I want to add my mother. Emily turned to look at him. Sophia, he said. She loved this song. She sang it to your grandmother over a garden wall when they were girls. She sang it to me the night she died. She's part of this family, Emily, as much as any Merino. She and Rosa were sisters in every way that counts. So I want her in the song. I want our child to grow up singing my mother's name alongside yours. I don't want her to be a photograph in a box anymore. I want her to be a voice we carry forward. His own voice cracked. I want to bring her home. Emily took his hand, and she was crying and she was smiling. Then teach me her part, she said. Tell me everything you remember, and we'll write her into the song right beside my grandmother, where she always belonged, and our child will sing them both. And so, on that night, in the room where a maid had once sung to an empty house, Adrian Romano gave his mother back to the world. He told Emily everything he could remember, every fragment, the sound of Sophia's laugh, the songs she hummed while she cooked, the way she used to call him her little lion. And Emily wove it all into the melody, gave Sophia a verse, a place, a permanence, so that Sophia Romano, murdered 33 years ago and forbidden even to be named, would now be sung by every generation that followed, forever. 2 months later, on a cold, bright morning, Emily gave birth to a daughter. She was small and furious and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and a cry that filled the whole hospital wing, and when the nurse placed her in Adrian's arms, the most feared man Chicago had ever known sat down very carefully in a chair because his legs would no longer hold him, and he wept over his daughter the way he had once wept over a box of his mother's photographs. Except these were not tears of grief. These were the other kind, the kind he had not known his body was still capable of making. She's so small, he whispered. How is anything so small? How do I keep something this small safe in a world like ours? The world isn't like ours anymore, Emily said from the bed, exhausted and glowing. That's the whole point. We changed it. She's not going to grow up hunted. She's not going to grow up hidden. She's the first Merino in 100 years who gets to grow up free. No false names, no garden walls, no song sung in secret. She reached out and touched her daughter's tiny hand. She gets to just be a little girl. That's what we fought for. That's what everyone who came before us died for. So that this one, finally, could just be a child. They named her Rosa. Rosa Sophia. For the two women who had sung over a garden wall as girls, who had died the same night, whose blood had finally, against every possible odd, come back together in one small, furious, perfect child. Rosa for the grandmother who ran, so that Emily could live. Sophia for the mother who died, so that Adrian could survive to find her. Two names that had been buried in fear and silence, now spoken out loud, in the light, over a cradle. And on the first night that baby Rosa slept in the mansion, Emily and Adrian stood over her cradle together, and Emily sang the song. All of it. Every name, every generation, 100 years deep, And at the very end, in the space she had left open all those months ago, she finally filled it in. She sang her daughter's name, Rosa Sofia Marino Romano. A Marino and a Romano, the two families that a murderer had tried to destroy, joined now not by tragedy but by love, singing forward into a future he had failed to prevent. The years that followed were good ones, not perfect because no life is perfect, but good in the way that matters, full and warm and safe. The family Emily had built out of the ruins of Salvatore's empire grew into something the city had never seen from that world before. The hospitals they funded treated children who could not pay, the way Daniel once could not pay. The shelters they built took in people the city had forgotten, the way Emily had once been forgotten. The Marino name, which had been erased and hidden and whispered in fear for 3 generations, became a name that meant help had arrived. Emily never forgot where she came from. She kept, in a drawer in her bedroom, the worn coat and the cheap shoes she had been wearing the morning she first walked through the mansion gates. And sometimes she took them out and held them and remembered the terrified girl who had counted quarters for the bus and chosen between food and medicine. She never let herself become the kind of person who looked past a maid cleaning a floor. She knew, better than anyone alive, that the most important person in any room might be the one nobody was looking at. And Adrian became a father, the way he did everything once he'd decided to do it, completely, with his whole heart. The man who had believed emotion was weakness spent his evenings on the floor playing with his daughter. The man who had thrown beautiful women out of his home without a second glance now negotiated fiercely with a small girl over bedtimes and vegetables and lost every negotiation gladly. Rosa grew up climbing on the lap of a man other men had once been terrified to look in the eye, and she was never afraid of him for a single day of her life, because she only ever knew the warm version, the thawed version, the version Emily had reached with a song sung to an empty room. Little Rosa learned the song before she learned to read. That was Emily's rule, and it was the most important rule in the house. Every Marino, every child born into the family, learned the song young, learned all the names, learned to sing it out loud without fear, because Emily had understood, in a way her grandmother never got to, that the safety was not in the hiding. The safety was in the numbers. A song known by one person can be silenced. A song known by 50, by 100, by every child in a growing family can never be killed. So she taught it, openly, joyfully, to everyone, and by the time little Rosa was 6 years old, she could sing every name from 100 years back, all the way up to her own, without a single mistake, and she thought it was the most normal thing in the world, and that was the greatest victory of all. It was on Rosa's 6th birthday that Emily found her daughter sitting at the same piano where it had all begun, singing the song softly to herself, thinking no one could hear. Emily stopped in the doorway, and for a moment the years folded over on themselves, and she was watching herself, a girl singing to an empty room, and she was watching her grandmother and her great-grandmother, and every woman in that 100-year-old song who had ever passed the melody forward. She stood very still and listened to her daughter sing, and she understood that she was watching the whole point of everything. This was what Rosa Marino had run 50 years to protect. Not a person. This, a child, safe and free and loved, singing her family's names without knowing there had ever been any reason to be afraid. "That's beautiful, my love," Emily said softly. Rosa looked up and beamed. "I was singing to Great-Grandma Rosa and Grandma Sophia," she said, with the easy certainty of a child who has never doubted that the people in the song are as real as the people in the room. "Daddy says they can hear me. Is that true, Mama? Can they hear me?" Emily crossed the room and sat down on the piano bench beside her daughter, the same bench where Adrian had once given his mother back to the world. "Yes," she said, and she believed it with her whole heart. "They can hear you. They hear every word. And do you know what they're feeling right now, listening to you sing?" "What?" "They're the happiest they've ever been," Emily said. "Because a long time ago, some very bad men tried to make our family disappear. They tried to make it so that no one would ever sing this song again, so that no one would ever say these names. They wanted us to be forgotten." She brushed a dark curl out of her daughter's face. "But here you are. A little girl who isn't afraid of anything, singing every single name out loud in a house full of light on your 6th birthday. And that means the bad men lost, Rosa. They lost completely, because you're here, and you're singing, and you're not afraid. Her voice went thick. You are the answer to everything they tried to do. You are how we won. Rosa considered this with the seriousness of a 6-year-old. So when I sing, I'm winning. Emily laughed, and it came out half a sob. Yes, baby, every time you sing, you're winning. And someday, a long time from now, you'll teach the song to your own children, and you'll leave a space at the end, the way I left one for you, and the way Great-Grandma Rosa left one for me, and they'll fill it in with their own names. And that's how the family goes on forever. She kissed the top of her daughter's head. As long as someone is still singing, we're never gone. Not ever. That evening, the whole family gathered, as they did on every birthday, and Adrian stood in the great hall with his daughter on his shoulders, and Emily stood beside them, and Elena and Daniel and every merino they had gathered out of 30 years of scattered shadow filled the room. And they sang the song together, all of them, every name, 100 years and more of a family that a murderer had once declared dead. And at the very end, little Rosa sang her own name, loud and clear and proud, and the whole room sang it with her. Adrian caught Emily's eye across the crowded, singing, joyful room, and he did not have to say anything, because she knew exactly what he was thinking. He was thinking about a cold morning 3 years and a lifetime ago, when a man who had frozen his own heart solid heard a maid singing to an empty room, and stopped and listened, and did not know that the sound was about to give him back everything he had ever lost. Every beautiful woman in the city had tried to reach him and failed. And then a tired girl with a good heart who owned nothing and wanted nothing had sung an old song without knowing anyone could hear, and had reached the one thing 30 years of walls had been built to protect. She had reached the boy under the bed. She had reached the son who had forgotten his mother's face. She had reached the man everyone feared and no one loved, and she had not done it with beauty or wealth or power. She had done it with kindness and courage, and a song her grandmother taught her, carried across 100 years and 3 generations and one terrible night of fire, all so that it could arrive exactly when it was needed, in the heart of a broken man who had given up on ever feeling anything again. Emily Marino looked at her husband and her daughter and her brother and her cousin, and the enormous, impossible, beautiful family she had built out of ashes and courage and one old melody, and she knew, with a certainty that would never leave her for the rest of her long and happy life, that her grandmother had been right about everything. The greatest power in the world is not inherited through money, and it cannot be seized through fear. It comes from a good heart that refuses to break, and it comes from a voice that refuses to stay silent. Emily had walked into that mansion as a woman nobody noticed, and she had walked out of that story as the woman who saved a family, healed a man, and proved for all time that the smallest, quietest, most overlooked person in any room can turn out to be the one who changes everything. She had been told her whole life that she was nothing, and she had turned out to be the song that could not be silenced.